The Ship of Theseus in time. Imagine a ship resting in a quiet harbor. Its wooden planks have weathered countless storms, its sails faded from years beneath the sun. One by one, the crew replaces each piece. A rotten plank here, a worn rope there, a cracked mast, a new rudder. Eventually, not a single part of the original ship remains, and yet it still sails under the same name, still carries the same flag, still feels, somehow, like the same vessel. This is the Ship of Theseus, an ancient thought experiment about identity and change. It asks a question that sounds simple, but hides a paradox that cuts to the core of what we are. If every part of something is replaced, is it still the same thing? And if not, when did it stop being itself? Now imagine that same ship not through space, but through time. Every moment, like each plank, is replaced by the next. The ship moves forward, carrying no single part of what it once was, and yet to the sailors aboard, it feels continuous, unchanged, alive, one. This is the Ship of Theseus in time. A paradox that transforms a question about wood and nails into one about memory, consciousness, and existence itself. To understand it, let's start with the original puzzle. In the first version, the problem is physical. If every component of the ship is replaced, is it the same ship? Some philosophers argue yes. Identity lies not in the material, but in the pattern. It's the continuity of structure, purpose, and story that defines what something is. Just as a river remains the same river, even as its waters constantly change, the ship is still the Ship of Theseus, because its form and function persist. But others disagree. They say that if you replaced every plank, you've created a copy, not a continuation. And if someone gathered all the old discarded parts and rebuilt the original ship elsewhere, then which one would be the real Ship of Theseus? The one with the continuous journey, or the one with the original material? Now take that same dilemma and apply it not to a ship, but to yourself. Every cell in your body is replaced over time. Your thoughts evolve, your memories fade, your beliefs shift. The person you were 10 years ago exists now only in echoes, and yet you still call yourself by the same name. So what is it that continues? What makes you, you? The Ship of Theseus in time asks this quietly devastating question. If every moment of you has been replaced, is the present you truly the same being who began the journey? Or are you simply a continuation of a pattern mistaken for permanence? Some philosophers argue that identity is rooted in continuity of consciousness. As long as your awareness flows seamlessly from one moment to the next, you remain the same person, even if everything else changes. You are the thread that connects each instant, not a static object, but a living process. Identity, in this view, is not a thing to preserve, but a story to keep telling. But others see the paradox differently. They suggest that the self is an illusion, a mirage created by memory and habit, that there is no single you enduring through time, but only a chain of temporary experiences that remember some of what came before. Like the ship, you are rebuilt every moment, carrying just enough memory to believe in your own continuity. This idea finds strange support in science. The neurons in your brain constantly die and are replaced. Your body renews itself on a cellular level every few years. Even your memories, the anchors of your identity, are rewritten each time you recall them, reshaped by context and emotion. In a very real sense, you are not the same person who started this day, or even this sentence. So what then holds you together? If time strips away every part of who you were, why does the illusion of self remain so strong? Perhaps because identity is not found in what stays the same, but in what connects the change. The Ship of Theseus may lose every plank, but it never loses its journey. Likewise, you are not the person you once were, but you carry the memory of becoming them. And that memory, fragile though it is, creates the thread that binds each version of you together. It's the same thread that runs through time itself, linking every second to the next, turning countless fragments of change into the seamless flow we call existence. The Ship of Theseus in time is not just about ships or wood or bodies. It's about impermanence. It reminds us that everything changes, yet somehow continues. That the self, like the universe, is a process of constant renewal. And maybe that's not a paradox at all, but the quiet truth hidden beneath it, that identity is not something you keep, it's something you create, moment by moment, plank by plank, through the endless tide of time.
The Arrow of Time Paradox. Every morning you wake up in a world that only moves one way, forward. The sun rises, people age, memories form, and shattered glass never jumps back together. You can recall the past, but never the future. You can destroy, but never unbreak. Time, it seems, has a direction, a built-in flow that carries everything from what was to what is and what will be. This is what physicists call the arrow of time, and it hides one of the deepest paradoxes in all of science. Because while our everyday experience tells us that time always moves forward, the fundamental laws of physics, the equations that govern everything from falling apples to orbiting galaxies, don't actually care which direction time flows. They work perfectly well backward. Imagine you filmed two billiard balls colliding on a table. If you reversed the footage, it would still make sense. The physics works both ways: the collision, the momentum, the rebound. But if you film a cup falling from a table and shattering, the reversed version, the pieces leaping together into a perfect cup, looks absurd. So why does one process feel natural and the other impossible when both are governed by the same physical rules? The paradox lies in this contradiction between a universe whose basic laws are time-symmetric and a lived experience that is irreversibly one way. Somehow, out of equations that treat the future and the past as equals, the universe has chosen a direction. And that direction is what we call time's arrow. The physicist Arthur Eddington coined the term in 1927, defining it as the one direction of time that we actually experience. But even he admitted that its origin is one of the great unsolved mysteries of science. To understand the paradox, we need to look at something called entropy, the measure of disorder in a system. According to the second law of thermodynamics, entropy in a closed system can never decrease. Order collapses into chaos. Heat spreads out. Energy dissipates. An egg can break, but it cannot unbreak. This law seems to give time its direction. The universe moves from low entropy, highly ordered, to high entropy, disordered. But here's the strange part. If the laws of physics are truly symmetric, then entropy should increase both forward and backward in time. Nothing in those equations require the future to be different from the past. So why does time have a preferred direction at all? One answer lies in initial conditions, the starting state of the universe. At the moment of the Big Bang, the universe was in a state of incredibly low entropy, an unlikely, almost impossibly ordered beginning. Over billions of years, that order has slowly unraveled. Stars burn out, galaxies drift apart, and everything cools. Entropy rises, and with it, time moves forward. The arrow of time may not come from the laws of physics, but from the starting point those laws were set in motion from. But that explanation raises its own question. Why was the universe so ordered to begin with? Why did it start in a state so improbable that it set the arrow of time in motion? No one knows. It's a paradox that reaches beyond science into the very heart of existence. Some physicists suggest that the arrow of time might reverse in certain parts of the cosmos. That somewhere on the far side of creation, another universe could be expanding in the opposite temporal direction. To us, their time would run backward. To them, ours would. Each would see the other as living in reverse, a mirror universe perfectly consistent, but forever unreachable. Others argue that time's arrow is a property of consciousness, not the universe itself. Our brains record memories, and that recording process depends on entropy increasing, neurons firing, energy dispersing, heat building. If entropy didn't rise, there would be no memory, no sense of before or after. In that sense, perhaps it's not that time flows at all, but that we do. We're the ones moving, carried along on the expanding wave of entropy, creating the illusion of a river where there may be only stillness. It's an unsettling thought that the flow of time might be nothing more than perspective, a trick of biology written into the physics of decay. Because at the deepest level, the universe may be timeless. Every moment, past, present, and future, might already exist, laid out like pages in a book that are all written, but read one at a time. We call it flow because we only ever see one sentence at once. The arrow of time paradox reminds us that what feels absolute and unstoppable might simply be the shape of our own perception. It suggests that time, the thing we trust most, is not a force, but a shadow, cast by something larger and stranger than we can imagine.
Grandfather Paradox. Imagine standing in front of a time machine. Its polished metal glows faintly in the dim light, humming with the quiet promise of the impossible. You step inside, set the date to decades before your birth, and in an instant, you're there. You find your grandfather as a young man, long before he met your grandmother. But then, by accident or intention, you prevent their meeting. And in that moment, something unthinkable happens. You erase the very conditions that allowed you to exist. This is the Grandfather Paradox, one of the most famous and troubling puzzles in the study of time travel. It begins with a simple question. If you could travel into the past, could you change it? And if you did, what would happen to the present that led you there? Let's walk carefully through this tangle of logic. At its heart, the paradox works like this. If you were to travel back in time and prevent your grandfather from meeting your grandmother, your parents would never be born, and therefore, neither would you. But if you were never born, you couldn't have traveled back in time to stop them from meeting. And if you didn't travel back, then they did meet, your parents were born, and you did exist, which means you could go back. Round and round it goes, a loop with no logical escape. The Grandfather Paradox isn't just a riddle about family trees, it's a direct challenge to the very structure of reality. It reveals the deep contradictions that emerge when we try to make time behave like space, something we can move through, rearrange, or revisit at will. Our everyday experience tells us that causes come before effects, but time travel flips that order, creating effects that seem to undo their own causes. In philosophy, this is called a causal loop, a situation where an event depends on itself for its own existence. Physicists and philosophers have wrestled with this paradox for a century. Some argue that it proves that backward time travel is impossible. If changing the past creates logical contradictions, then the universe must simply forbid it, a kind of built-in protection against paradoxes. This idea is known as the Novikov self-consistency principle. It suggests that even if time travel were possible, you could never change events that have already happened. Every action you take in the past would be part of the same consistent timeline. If you go back and meet your grandfather, perhaps you knock over a photograph, say a few words, and leave. But whatever you do, it was always destined to happen that way. You were never going to erase yourself because your actions were already woven into history. Others take a different view. They suggest that the paradox doesn't block time travel, it just branches it. In this interpretation, the moment you alter the past, you create a new timeline. In that alternate reality, your grandfather never meets your grandmother, and you are never born. But the original version of you continues to exist, safe in the timeline you came from. This idea is sometimes called the many worlds interpretation, borrowed from quantum physics. Every choice, every event, every branching possibility spins off into its own version of the universe, each one internally consistent, each one unaware of the others. Both explanations, the self-consistent timeline and the branching multiverse, attempt to resolve the same haunting contradiction. But neither truly satisfies our intuition, because both raise new questions. If every change creates a new universe, what happens to the old one? And if everything is predetermined, what does that mean for free will? The grandfather paradox doesn't just test the limits of physics, it tests the boundaries of meaning itself. It asks whether time is something we move through or something that simply is. If the past cannot be changed, perhaps it isn't behind us at all. Perhaps it still exists, quietly unfolding alongside the present and the future, all three bound together in a single, unbroken tapestry of space-time. Even Einstein hinted at this idea. He once said that the distinction between past, present, and future is only a stubbornly persistent illusion. In the world of relativity, time is not a flowing river. It's a landscape, and we are travelers moving through it in one direction. But the grandfather paradox whispers that maybe, just maybe, there are paths that lead back the other way, paths that circle upon themselves, where cause and effect meet in the middle. Ultimately, the paradox remains unresolved, not because physics has failed, but because it forces us to confront questions that reach beyond science. Can a universe truly contain contradictions? Or do paradoxes simply mark the edges of what we can understand? Perhaps the real lesson of the grandfather paradox is that time is not as simple as a line, and existence is not as fragile as it seems. It reminds us that every moment, past, present, or future, is connected in ways we can barely imagine. And while we may never step inside a time machine, the paradox endures, inviting us to ponder the one journey we can never take, back to the moment before we began.
The observer effect paradox. Imagine staring at a pond on a perfectly still morning. The water is flat and silent, reflecting the sky like glass. But the moment you lean closer, even to see it more clearly, your breath ripples the surface. The act of looking changes what you see. This simple idea lies at the heart of one of the strangest mysteries in science, the observer effect paradox. It asks a question so simple it feels impossible. Does watching something change what it is? And if so, how can we ever truly know the world as it really is? In the everyday world, observation feels harmless. We look at things, we measure them, we learn. But in the realm of quantum physics, just observing something can alter its very state of existence. Particles behave differently depending on whether they're being watched, a phenomenon that seems to break the rules of logic itself. The story begins with a famous experiment, the double-slit experiment. Physicists fired tiny particles of light, called photons, at a screen with two narrow openings, or slits. If photons were like bullets, you'd expect them to form two bright lines on the wall behind. But instead, they formed a complex pattern of ripples, an interference pattern like overlapping waves in water. It suggested that each photon wasn't just a particle, but also a wave, passing through both slits at once, interfering with itself. Then the scientists tried something strange. They placed a detector by the slits to see which one each photon went through. And suddenly, the interference pattern vanished. The photons stopped behaving like waves and acted like ordinary particles again. Simply measuring them, simply watching, seemed to force them to make a choice. This is the observer effect. A photon exists as a cloud of probabilities, a wave of potential outcomes, until it's observed. The moment it's measured, that cloud collapses into a single reality. In other words, observation doesn't just reveal reality, it creates it. But how can that be? How can something as passive as observation transform the nature of existence itself? The paradox lies in the idea that the universe behaves differently depending on whether anyone is watching. It suggests that reality might not be fixed and objective, but fluid and relational, shaped by interaction, defined by awareness. For decades, physicists have argued about what this means. The Copenhagen interpretation, first proposed by Niels Bohr, says that quantum objects don't have definite properties until they are observed. Before measurement, they exist in superposition, multiple states at once. It's not that the photon secretly knows which slit it went through, it truly hasn't decided yet. Only observation forces the decision. But not everyone agrees. Some, like Einstein, found this idea intolerable. He famously said, "I like to think the moon is there even if I'm not looking at it." To him, reality had to exist independently of observation. If it didn't, the universe would seem to depend on consciousness, on someone being there to see it. Other interpretations tried to solve the paradox differently. The many worlds interpretation suggests that every possible outcome happens, each in its own parallel universe. In one world, the photon goes through the left slit. In another, the right. Observation doesn't collapse reality, it splits it. Every observation creates a branching tree of possibilities, each equally real, each forever beyond the reach of the others. And yet, even this explanation leads us deeper into mystery. If observation defines which world we see, then who or what is the ultimate observer? If everything depends on being measured, what measured the universe before there were observers at all, before there were eyes or minds or consciousness to witness it? Some scientists point to decoherence, the idea that interactions with the environment act as a kind of observation, forcing systems to settle into definite states. But philosophers see something deeper. They suggest that maybe the act of awareness itself, not human but universal, is woven into the fabric of reality, that perhaps the universe knows itself through observation. It's a humbling thought, that every glance, every act of noticing isn't just passive perception, but active participation in existence. When you look at the stars, you are part of the process that defines them.
When you think about the past, you help give shape to what it means. The observer effect paradox stretches far beyond physics. It touches psychology, philosophy, even spirituality. Because in a way, the same thing happens inside us. When you observe your own thoughts, when you look inward, you change them. Awareness alters emotion. Attention reshapes the mind. Observation is never neutral. It always transforms both the observer and the observed. Maybe that's the real heart of the paradox, that the universe is not a stage we stand upon, but a mirror that responds when we look at it. Maybe we were never separate from what we see. Maybe observation isn't about distance, but connection. And if that's true, then every act of seeing, every moment of awareness is a small act of creation, a reminder that to witness reality is to become part of it.
The paradox of choice. Imagine standing in front of a wall of doors. Behind each one lies a different version of your life, a different city, a different career, a different love. You could choose any of them, and that freedom feels intoxicating. But as you stare, the possibilities begin to blur into anxiety. You start to wonder which door is right, and whether choosing one means losing something far more precious behind the rest. This quiet tension is the heart of the paradox of choice, the strange, unsettling truth that the more options we have, the less free we often feel. In modern life, we're surrounded by abundance. Supermarkets with 30 types of cereal, streaming services with endless films, jobs, partners, destinations, infinite possibilities, each demanding a decision. We've been told that freedom means having as many choices as possible, but psychologists and philosophers now suggest that too much choice doesn't liberate us, it paralyzes us. The paradox was popularized by psychologist Barry Schwartz, who argued that an excess of options creates stress, dissatisfaction, and regret. When choices were limited, we simply chose what was good enough. But now, faced with endless possibilities, we chase perfection, and in doing so, we make ourselves miserable. Imagine walking into an ice cream shop with 3 flavors. You might pick chocolate and feel happy with your choice. But if the shop offered 50 flavors, suddenly your decision feels heavier. You spend longer comparing, worrying that you might choose wrong, haunted by the thought of what you didn't pick. Even after you decide, you wonder if pistachio might have been better. Your satisfaction melts away, not because the ice cream changed, but because you did. This is the paradox of choice in action. More freedom gives us more opportunity, but also more pressure, more expectation, and more room for regret. Psychologists call this maximizing, the tendency to seek the best possible outcome. Maximizers are meticulous, cautious, and often unhappy. They weigh every option, compare endlessly, and second-guess themselves long after deciding. By contrast, satisficers, those who settle for good enough, tend to feel calmer and more content. They recognize that perfection is an illusion, and that happiness comes not from the perfect choice, but from peace with the one you made. The paradox of choice reaches deeper than psychology. It reveals something profound about the way we experience time and meaning. Because every choice you make collapses an infinite number of possible futures into one. Each decision is a door that closes behind you. You can't live all versions of your life. And yet the mind tries to, wandering through alternate paths, wondering who you'd be if you had chosen differently. This is the hidden cost of freedom. To choose is to lose. Every yes is 1,000 silent no's. And the more we value possibility, the more we mourn the futures that vanish the moment we decide. In that sense, The paradox of choice is not just about decisions, it's about identity. Because every choice is a small act of self-definition. You are the sum of the doors you've walked through and the infinite ones you never will. The freedom to choose gives you power, but also responsibility for who you become. And with that responsibility comes fear. Perhaps that's why people in simpler times often reported greater happiness, even with fewer options. Their choices were bounded, their paths narrower, and in that limitation there was peace. When life gives you one clear direction, you can walk it fully. When it gives you 1,000, you may spend your whole life deciding where to begin. Philosophers have long recognized this tension. Søren Kierkegaard once wrote that anxiety is the dizziness of freedom. The more we can choose, the more we feel the weight of possibility and the fear of making the wrong choice. But he also believed that this anxiety is not a flaw, it's the very essence of being human, because to live consciously is to stand before the infinite and choose anyway. The paradox of choice reminds us that freedom without direction becomes chaos, and that happiness often lives not in endless options, but in commitment, the quiet courage to choose one path and walk it fully, without looking back. So what can we do? Perhaps the answer is not to seek fewer choices, but to change how we relate to them, to choose with intention, to accept imperfection, and to let go of the belief that there is always something better waiting elsewhere. Because the truth is, there will always be another door. But peace comes from standing still long enough to realize that the one you've opened is already enough. In the end, the paradox of choice teaches us something simple yet profound. Freedom is not the power to have everything. It's the wisdom to be content with something. And once you understand that, the noise quiets, the doors stop spinning, and the world feels still again. Not because there are fewer paths, but because you've finally chosen one.
Schrodinger's cat paradox. Picture a sealed box sitting silently on a table. Inside is a cat, alive or perhaps not. You cannot see inside. You cannot hear a sound. For all you know, the cat could be peacefully breathing or already gone. Until you open the box, you cannot know. But according to quantum theory, the truth is stranger than that. Because until you look, the cat is both alive and dead at the same time. This is the Schrodinger cat paradox, one of the most famous and unsettling thought experiments in physics. It asks a question that sounds absurd but cuts to the heart of reality itself. Does something exist in a definite state before it's observed, or does observation itself bring reality into being? To understand how we got here, we need to step into the strange world of quantum mechanics, the science of the very small. At the atomic scale, particles don't behave like solid objects. They exist in clouds of probability, in multiple states at once. A single particle can spin both clockwise and counterclockwise, exist in two places at the same time, or pass through two slits simultaneously. This strange state is called superposition. When we measure or observe the particle, that superposition collapses. The particle chooses one definite state. Before measurement, it is many possibilities. Afterward, it is one. This is the mystery that puzzled physicists in the early 20th century, including the Austrian scientist Erwin Schrödinger. In 1935, frustrated by how surreal quantum theory sounded, Schrödinger imagined a scenario to expose its contradictions. He said, "Let's take something big, something alive, and see what happens." Inside the box, he imagined a cat, a vial of poison, a Geiger counter, and a single radioactive atom. If the atom decays, the Geiger counter triggers, the poison is released, and the cat dies. If the atom does not decay, the cat lives. But, and here's the key, quantum mechanics says that until we observe the atom, it exists in a superposition of both decayed and undecayed.
Therefore, the cat, linked to the atom's fate, is also in a superposition, alive and dead at once. It sounds impossible, and that's exactly what Schrodinger intended. He wanted to show that if quantum mechanics were taken literally, its logic led to absurd conclusions. Surely a cat cannot be both alive and dead, but the equation said otherwise. So what's really going on inside the box? Does observation truly decide reality? One interpretation, known as the Copenhagen interpretation, suggests that yes, the act of observation collapses the wave of probabilities into one outcome. Until someone looks, the system exists as both. When the box is opened, the universe decides. The cat becomes alive or dead, not both. But this explanation only deepens the paradox. What counts as observation? Is it a human eye? A machine? Another particle interacting with the system? At what exact moment does possibility become reality? And if observation defines existence, what happens to the universe when no one's watching? Other interpretations tried to escape this trap. The many worlds interpretation proposes that both outcomes occur, but in separate parallel realities. In one universe, the cat lives, in another, it dies. Each outcome is real, but they diverge the instant the event happens. We experience only one branch, unaware that countless others unfold beside us. According to this view, the universe never collapses at all. It simply keeps splitting infinitely. A third idea, called decoherence, suggests that the cat superposition is destroyed long before we open the box. Interactions with air molecules, heat, or light cause the quantum system to lose its delicate balance, collapsing naturally into one state or the other. In this sense, the cat is never truly both alive and dead. It only appears that way in theory. But despite decades of debate, no one fully agrees on what the cat's box truly represents. Some see it as a metaphor for consciousness, the idea that awareness itself gives rise to reality. Others see it as proof that our human minds struggle to comprehend the universe that doesn't obey classical intuition. And maybe that's the point. The Schrodinger cat paradox doesn't exist to be solved. It exists to remind us that reality may be far stranger than anything we can directly observe. Because if the cat is both alive and dead until we look, then perhaps every moment of existence is like that unopened box, a shimmering field of potential waiting for attention to give it shape. Every choice, every thought, every heartbeat, collapsing infinite possibilities into the single path we call now. In the end, the paradox is less about physics and more about perception. It shows us that the boundary between observer and observed may not exist at all, that we and the universe are partners in the act of creation. And maybe that's the quiet beauty of the box. Not that the cat's fate depends on us, but that reality itself might be alive only in the moment we dare to look.
The Teleportation Paradox. Imagine stepping into a machine that promises the impossible. It scans every atom in your body, records every detail, every molecule, every neuron, every flicker of thought inside your brain. Then, in an instant, it transmits that information to another location, across the world or perhaps across the stars, and reconstructs you there, atom by atom, perfectly identical. You step out unchanged, with the same memories, the same body, the same feeling that you are you. It sounds miraculous, but somewhere in the place you began, your original body is destroyed, disintegrated into nothing. And now the question arises, quietly but sharply beneath the hum of the machine, did you survive? Or did you die, replaced by an identical copy that only believes it's you? This is the Teleportation Paradox, a haunting question about identity, continuity, and the nature of self. It asks whether perfect duplication is truly survival or a form of elegant death. The paradox begins with a simple premise. If a teleportation machine perfectly recreates every particle of you, then in theory, it has created another you, indistinguishable in every way. Your memories, your personality, your hopes and fears, all replicated. To everyone else, nothing has changed, and yet something invisible might have been lost, the unbroken thread of consciousness that connects one moment to the next. Philosophers call this the problem of personal identity. What makes you the same person over time? Is it your physical body, your memories, your consciousness, or something else, something intangible that continuity alone preserves? The Teleportation Paradox challenges that continuity. Because if you can be destroyed in one place and reassembled somewhere else, what happens in between? Does the you who steps out of the machine remember your past life because they are you, or because they were programmed to think they are you? At first, it feels like semantics, but the deeper you think about it, the more unsettling it becomes. If you accept that perfect replication preserves identity, then imagine creating two identical copies instead of one. Both claim to be you, both share your memories, both remember walking into the machine. So which one is the real you, or are both, and therefore neither, truly you at all? This question isn't just science fiction. It lies at the heart of modern discussions about mind uploading and artificial consciousness. If one day we could scan the human brain and reproduce it in digital form, would that consciousness be you, or a copy of you? If the original still exists, does one of you have to die for the other to live authentically? The philosopher Derek Parfit explored this dilemma in depth. He argued that identity is not about numerical sameness, not about being the exact same person, but about psychological continuity. If the new being thinks, feels, and remembers as you do, then identity has effectively been preserved, even if the original consciousness ended. In other words, you are nothing more than a pattern that can continue even if the physical substance changes. But others find this answer deeply unsatisfying. Continuity is not enough, because even if the copy is perfect, the moment of destruction breaks the chain of experience. The original you never wakes up on the other side. To the outside world, teleportation looks like travel. To the traveler, it might be death disguised as arrival. And that's what makes the teleportation paradox so haunting. It transforms a science fantasy into a question of existence itself. If the self can be duplicated, then what does it mean to be original? If a perfect copy feels pain, laughs, loves, and believes it's you, then what separates you from it? Some thinkers have compared this to the Ship of Theseus, but stretched through time instead of wood and nails. Just as the ship remains itself through gradual replacement, perhaps teleportation is simply a faster version of the same process, destroying and rebuilding instantaneously instead of over decades. If you don't mourn the cells your body replaces every day, why should you mourn the atoms rebuilt by a machine? But deep down, most people sense a difference, because gradual change feels continuous. Teleportation feels like interruption. And somewhere in that break, something essential might be lost. The teleportation paradox forces us to confront how fragile our sense of identity really is. It suggests that you are not a fixed thing, but a story your brain tells, a story that could, in theory, be told elsewhere by something else and still feel true. Perhaps that's what makes this paradox so quietly terrifying. It implies that the self is not a solid object, but a pattern of information, a song played on the instrument of the brain. Destroy the instrument and the song can be played again. But is it the same song or merely a perfect imitation of it? Maybe the answer lies not in physics or philosophy, but in perspective. From the outside, teleportation looks like continuity. From the inside, it's unknowable. We will never see what happens between disappearance and arrival. And perhaps that's the final layer of the paradox, that the one person who could ever know ceases to exist before they can tell us. In the end, the teleportation paradox isn't about machines or travel. It's about what it means to be. It reminds us that existence may not be preserved in matter or memory, but in the unbroken experience of being alive right now. The only moment that truly belongs to you and the only one that never needs to be rebuilt.
The twin paradox. Imagine two twins standing together under a silent night sky.
They look identical, same face, same heartbeat, same moment in time. But one of them steps into a spacecraft, a vessel built to move faster than anything on Earth. They wave goodbye, and with a surge of light, the ship disappears into the stars. Years pass. The twin on Earth grows older, slowly, steadily, naturally. The one aboard the ship travels near the speed of light, crossing unimaginable distances in what feels like only a few years. When they finally return home, the traveler steps out and finds that decades have passed on Earth. The sibling they left behind is now old, while they themselves have barely aged. Two twins, born at the same time, now separated by time itself. This is the twin paradox, a thought experiment that challenges our deepest assumptions about time, motion, and the nature of reality. At first glance, it feels impossible. After all, aren't the laws of physics the same for everyone? How can two people who began together end up aging at different rates simply because one moved faster? The paradox arises from Einstein's theory of special relativity. According to relativity, time is not an absolute, universal clock ticking away identically everywhere. It's flexible, woven together with space into a single fabric, space-time. And that fabric bends depending on motion and gravity. The faster you move, the slower time passes for you compared to someone standing still. For the traveling twin, their high-speed journey stretches space and compresses time. Their heartbeat slows, their clock ticks more gently, their seconds expand like soft elastic. Meanwhile, for the twin on Earth, time continues as normal, the rhythm of days and nights, the steady pulse of the seasons. When the twins reunite, each has experienced a different passage of time, and yet, from the perspective of physics, neither was wrong. Each followed the laws of relativity exactly. The paradox lies not in contradiction, but in perception. Einstein showed that there is no single objective now. Every observer experiences time according to their own motion. There is no universal clock, no absolute present shared by all. Time is local, personal, relative, and deeply intertwined with movement. But why does the traveling twin age less? Because their journey involves acceleration, a change in motion that breaks the symmetry. While the earthbound twin remains in a constant frame of reference, the traveler leaves it, turns, and returns. That shift, that bending of motion through space-time, creates a genuine difference in how time flows for each of them. It's not just theory. Experiments have confirmed the twin paradox countless times. Atomic clocks flown on high-speed jets or orbiting Earth aboard satellites tick ever so slightly slower than identical clocks on the ground. GPS systems even must account for this, correcting for both speed and gravity to keep navigation accurate. Time, it turns out, literally runs differently depending on where and how you are. The implications are extraordinary. It means that time is not a river flowing evenly through the universe, but a landscape, and we are travelers moving across it at different speeds. One person's minute may not match another's. One civilization's century might pass in the blink of a cosmic eye to another. In a sense, we are all time travelers already, each of us carried forward at slightly different rates through the fabric of space-time. But the twin paradox also raises deeper, more human questions. If time can stretch and bend, what does that mean for memory, for aging, for the way we experience life itself? To the twin who traveled, the journey may have felt brief, a few quiet years among the stars. But to the twin on Earth, a lifetime has passed. Friends have grown old, cities have changed, entire generations may have come and gone. For one, it was a voyage. For the other, it was forever. And so, beneath the equations and experiments, the twin paradox reveals something deeply emotional. That time is not just a measure of seconds and minutes, but a measure of experience. The faster we move, the slower we live, not just physically, but metaphorically. The more we rush, the more we distort the rhythm of life itself. In that sense, the paradox isn't just about physics, it's a reflection of being human. We all experience time differently. Moments of joy can feel infinite. Moments of pain can last in eternity. Time stretches and compresses not just for astronauts, but for everyone who has ever fallen in love, grieved, dreamed, or waited.
The twin paradox reminds us that the universe is far stranger than our senses suggest, and that time, the thing we trust most, is not a constant companion, but a flexible, shifting illusion we share with everything that moves. And maybe that's the quiet lesson of the twins' reunion. The time is not a wall that separates us, but a thread that connects every motion, every heartbeat, every beginning and every end into one continuous tapestry. And that even across decades, even across galaxies, we are all still traveling together through the same mysterious fabric of time.
The paradox of existence. Try to imagine nothing. Not the blackness of space, not an empty void, but true, absolute nothing. No matter, no energy, no light or darkness, no time, no space, no awareness to even perceive the absence. It's impossible, isn't it? Because the very act of imagining nothing already creates something in your mind. And yet, that's the question at the heart of the paradox of existence. Why is there something rather than nothing? Why does anything exist at all? You, me, the universe, this moment? Every religion, philosophy, and science has wrestled with it, and none has ever truly answered it. Because no matter how far back we look, we always find something waiting for us there. Something that demands a cause, a reason, a beginning. The story of existence, according to modern physics, begins with the Big Bang, a moment when all matter, energy, space, and time burst from a single point smaller than an atom. But if that's true, what came before the Big Bang, and what made it happen? The problem is there was no before. Time itself began with that explosion, so asking what caused it is like asking what's north of the North Pole. It's a question the universe refuses to answer. Maybe the universe created itself, a quantum fluctuation from nothing, where nothing wasn't true nothingness at all, but a restless vacuum humming with potential. In that model, existence is a kind of self-loop, something arising spontaneously from a field that can't ever be fully empty. But that doesn't solve the paradox, because if this quantum field always existed, then we've just moved the mystery back one step. Why does that exist? Religions offer a different kind of explanation. Some say there is a necessary being, a consciousness, God, or eternal principle that exists by its very nature, and through it, everything else flows. But even this answer hides the same question inside it. Why should such a being exist rather than not? If God created existence, what created God? If nothing created God, why not simply say that nothing created the universe? Maybe nothingness itself is unstable. Perhaps the natural state of reality isn't absence, but being. Maybe existence is not a question that needs answering. Maybe it's the one thing that never could have been otherwise. Still, it's unsettling to think that there might be no reason. We are creatures wired for cause and effect, for stories with beginnings and ends. But the paradox of existence reminds us that some stories have neither, that the very idea of why might dissolve when we reach the foundations of everything. And yet, even if we can't explain existence, we can marvel at it. The odds against something arising from nothing are infinite, and yet here you are, breathing, thinking, listening. Perhaps that's the quiet answer hidden in the paradox, that existence doesn't need a purpose to be beautiful. It simply is. And maybe that's enough. The Bootstrap Paradox. Imagine you find an old dusty book in your attic. You open it and discover it contains the complete blueprints for a revolutionary invention, something that will change the world. You study it, build the machine, and years later decide to publish those same blueprints. Decades pass. A young inventor finds your book in their attic. They build the same machine, and the cycle begins again. Here's the question: who wrote the book? This is the Bootstrap Paradox, a time travel riddle where information or even objects seem to exist without ever being created. They simply loop through time, forever handed from the future to the past and back again. At first, it feels like a trick of logic, an impossible circle, but it's actually a deep challenge to how we understand cause and effect. In the Bootstrap Paradox, an event becomes its own origin. A person travels back in time and inspires their younger self to do something, which later causes them to travel back in time and do the very same thing. There's no first cause, no true beginning, just an eternal echo of causality. In physics, this loop is sometimes called a closed time-like curve, a path through space-time that folds back onto itself. Einstein's general theory of relativity allows such curves in certain extreme conditions, where gravity bends space-time so completely that time itself becomes circular. The universe, it seems, doesn't explicitly forbid them, but it doesn't explain them either. To solve the paradox, some physicists invoke the Novikov self-consistency principle, the idea that events in space-time are self-consistent. You can travel to the past, but anything you do there was already part of history. You can't change the past because your actions in it were always meant to happen. The loop closes neatly, but uneasily. Yet the philosophical question remains: if the book or the idea or the machine exists only because of the loop, then where did it come from originally? If information creates itself, does that mean the universe can too? The Bootstrap Paradox whispers that maybe the universe itself is a kind of closed loop, a cosmic self-reference with no outside author, a reality that generates itself, a note that writes its own melody. It's a strange thought, that existence might not have begun anywhere, but everywhere at once, a story that tells itself into being. Maybe the Big Bang wasn't a beginning, but a rebound from its own future, a loop in time too vast for us to see. The Bootstrap Paradox doesn't just break the rules of time, it invites us to question whether beginnings exist at all. And perhaps like the mysterious book, we too are pages in a story that's been reading itself forever.
The Dream Paradox. You open your eyes. You're lying in your bed. The room looks familiar. You feel the warmth of the blanket, hear the faint hum of the world outside. Everything seems ordinary, until something shifts. A sound too clear, a detail too strange. And suddenly, you realize you're still dreaming. The Dream Paradox asks one haunting question: how do you know that you've ever truly woken up? Dreams feel real while we're inside them. They have weight, sound, color, emotion. They can frighten us, comfort us, even change us. But when we wake, they vanish, as though they were never real at all. And yet, as philosophers have long noted, the same could be said of waking life. How can you be sure this isn't just another layer of the dream? The Chinese philosopher Zhuangzi told a story that still echoes today. He once dreamed he was a butterfly, fluttering freely through the air. When he awoke, he wondered, was he a man who had dreamt he was a butterfly, or a butterfly now dreaming it was a man? Centuries later, René Descartes revisited that question. He realized that his senses could deceive him, that he could dream of warmth, taste, or sound and feel them as real. So he asked, how can I trust anything I perceive? His answer was simple. I think, therefore I am. Even if everything else is an illusion, the act of thinking proves that something exists, the mind itself. Modern science deepens the mystery rather than solves it. Brain scans show that the neural patterns during dreaming are almost identical to those during waking life. The mind, it seems, can simulate reality so convincingly that even awareness can't tell the difference. The dream paradox blurs the border between consciousness and illusion. If dreams can feel real and reality can dissolve like a dream, then perhaps what matters isn't which one is true, but what remains constant between them. The witness, the awareness that watches both unfold. Maybe life itself is a dream the universe is having, a long shared illusion we call reality. And maybe, one day, we'll wake to find that everything we ever knew was just a thought passing through an infinite mind.
The Fermi Paradox.
Look up at the night sky. Every speck of light you see is a star, each one a potential sun with its own family of planets. Somewhere out there could be another world like ours, bathed in warmth, water, and possibility. By sheer numbers alone, life should be everywhere. And yet, as far as we can tell, we are completely alone. This is the Fermi Paradox, a question that sits at the edge of science and philosophy alike. If intelligent life is common in the universe, then where is everyone? The paradox begins with a calculation. There are about 400 billion stars in our galaxy. Even if just a fraction of those have planets, and a fraction of those are habitable, the Milky Way should be home to millions of civilizations. Some would be far older than ours, their technology advanced enough to fill the galaxy with signals, machines, or even monuments. And yet, when we listen, we hear nothing but cosmic silence. There are many possible answers, each one stranger than the last. Some scientists believe that life is rare. Maybe the conditions that allowed Earth to flourish are so specific that they happen only once in a galaxy, like lightning striking the same tree across eternity. If that's true, then we might truly be alone, a cosmic accident, a solitary spark in a sea of dark. Others believe life may be common, but intelligence is fragile. Civilizations may rise, build, explore, and then collapse long before they ever make it to the stars. War, technology, climate, entropy. Perhaps the universe is littered with the ruins of species that once looked up and wondered as we do. Then there's the unsettling theory known as the Great Filter. It suggests that somewhere between the birth of life and the ability to travel beyond one's planet lies an almost insurmountable barrier, a step so difficult that almost nothing passes through. If the Great Filter is behind us, we may be one of the rare survivors. If it's ahead, we might never live to find out what it is. But there are other, more hopeful possibilities. Maybe we simply haven't looked long enough. Humanity has only been listening for a few decades, a single heartbeat in cosmic time. The signals might be there, still crossing the stars, arriving long after we're gone. Or perhaps we're surrounded by life that is simply too different to recognize. Civilizations made of light, data, plasma, or existing in dimensions beyond our own. To them, we might appear as invisible as microbes beneath their feet. And then there's a quieter possibility, that the universe is not empty, but watching. That advanced life hides intentionally, choosing silence over contact, patience over chaos. To such beings, we might be like children in a fragile garden, not yet ready to join the conversation. The Fermi Paradox isn't just a question of astronomy, it's a mirror held up to ourselves. Because if we are truly alone, then every song, every act of kindness, every spark of thought is infinitely precious, the only one of its kind in the cosmos. And if we are not alone, then we are part of something vast beyond comprehension, one voice in an endless chorus, still waiting to be heard. Maybe the silence isn't emptiness at all. Maybe it's an invitation, a cosmic pause, waiting for us to grow wise enough to speak back. The Fermi Paradox reminds us that even in the absence of answers, wonder remains, that the very act of asking connects us to the mystery we seek, and that, perhaps, the greatest signal we'll ever receive is the one we already carry, the quiet awareness that we are here, alive, listening.
The Consciousness Paradox. Close your eyes. You can feel your body, your breath, the pulse of your thoughts drifting across awareness. But what is that awareness itself? Where does it come from? And why does it feel like something to be you? This is the Consciousness Paradox, one of the deepest and most enduring mysteries in existence. How does matter, lifeless atoms and silent molecules, combine to create the experience of being? Science can describe what the brain does. It can trace neurons firing, map the regions that light up when you feel love or pain or awe.
But no amount of description explains why those physical processes should feel like anything at all. How does electrical activity become color, sound, emotion, and thought? That gap between mechanism and experience is what philosophers call the hard problem of consciousness. Some believe that consciousness simply emerges from complexity. When a system becomes intricate enough, when information flows, loops, and integrates, awareness arises naturally, like flame from fuel. In this view, consciousness is an emergent property, a side effect of the brain's evolution. But others argue that this explanation doesn't go far enough, because no matter how complex a machine becomes, complexity alone doesn't explain feeling. You could simulate pain, but who, if anyone, experiences it? A growing number of thinkers are turning the question upside down. Instead of asking how matter produces mind, they ask whether mind produces matter. This view, called panpsychism, suggests that consciousness is not an afterthought, but a fundamental ingredient of reality. Just as space and time are woven into the fabric of the universe, so too is awareness. In this picture, every particle, every atom contains a faint spark of experience, a whisper of knowing that becomes richer and more complex as the universe evolves. If that's true, then your consciousness is not something separate from the universe. It is the universe, looking back on itself. Still, no theory captures it completely, because consciousness is the one thing we can never observe from the outside. We can only live it from within. The moment we try to study it objectively, it slips away, like trying to see your own eyes without a mirror. Perhaps that's the heart of the paradox. We are both the observer and the observed, the question and the answer. Consciousness seeks to understand itself, but can never quite step outside of its own reflection. Some see this as proof that consciousness is eternal, that awareness existed before life, before stars, and that it will persist even after the last light fades. Others see it as the final frontier of science, the puzzle that will forever separate perception from knowledge. But maybe the mystery isn't meant to be solved. Maybe consciousness is not a problem to explain, but a gift to experience. A quiet miracle that allows the universe to taste itself, to feel its own existence through the pulse of living beings. When you close your eyes, the world doesn't vanish. It simply moves inside you. Every sound, every color, every touch is translated into awareness. And in that moment, the boundary between you and the universe disappears. The consciousness paradox reminds us that we are not observers standing apart from reality. We are reality, awake, aware, and dreaming of itself. Perhaps that is the greatest truth of all.
Zenos Dichotomy Paradox. Imagine a runner preparing to sprint down a track. The distance is short, just 100 meters. The runner takes a deep breath, launches forward, and begins to move. But according to an ancient philosopher named Zeno, that runner will never reach the finish line. This is the dichotomy paradox, one of several puzzles Zeno of Elea posed more than 2,000 years ago, and it still unsettles philosophers and mathematicians today. The idea is deceptively simple. Before the runner can reach the finish line, they must first reach the halfway point. Before reaching halfway, they must reach a quarter of the way. Before that, an eighth, and before that, a 16th. Each step requires another halfway point, and there are infinitely many halfway points to cross. If every journey must pass through an infinite number of steps, then how can motion ever be completed? How can anything ever reach its destination? At first, it sounds absurd. After all, people run races every day. But Zeno's logic is airtight. To move from point A to point B, you must first cover half the distance, then half of the remaining distance, and so on forever. The runner seems trapped in an infinite regression of smaller and smaller tasks. The paradox wasn't meant to deny motion itself, but to expose a contradiction at the heart of our reasoning. How can something composed of infinitely many parts add up to a finite whole? For centuries, philosophers debated it. Some said Zeno's paradox showed that motion is an illusion, that reality isn't continuous but momentary. a series of still frames our minds mistake for flow. Others said it revealed a flaw in how we think about infinity, a concept we can imagine but never fully grasp. It wasn't until the 19th century that mathematics found an answer. Using calculus, we learned that infinite series can sum to finite results. The infinite steps Zeno described can exist within a finite distance and a finite time. The runner can cross the line, it just takes a converging infinity to get there. But even that solution doesn't completely dissolve the paradox, because while math resolves the numbers, the mind still stumbles. We can understand infinity conceptually, but we can't experience it. The paradox remains, a mirror, showing the limits of human intuition in the face of the infinite. Zenos Dichotomy is more than a puzzle about motion. It's a meditation on how we divide the world. Every distance can be split again, every moment dissected into smaller and smaller fragments until what felt continuous dissolves into dust. Maybe that's the deeper lesson, that motion, time, and even life itself are illusions of continuity built from infinite parts, and that we never truly arrive anywhere. We only pass endlessly through halves of halves, forever approaching the finish line that was never meant to be reached.
The free will paradox. Every day you make choices, what to eat, where to go, whom to love. You feel free to act, to change, to decide your own path. But science, philosophy, and logic all whisper the same unsettling question. What if that freedom is an illusion? This is the free will paradox, the tension between our sense of autonomy and the possibility that everything we do is predetermined by the laws of nature. If the universe is governed by cause and effect, by particles colliding and forces interacting, then every action, every thought, every heartbeat is the inevitable result of what came before. Just as the planets orbit predictably, so too might we. The philosopher Baron de Holbach wrote in the 18th century that humans are complex machines, driven entirely by biology and environment. Our decisions feel free only because we don't see the countless invisible causes behind them. The neurons firing in your brain were shaped by genetics, upbringing, memory, and circumstance. By the time you decide, the decision has already been made. Modern neuroscience has found eerie evidence for this. In experiments, electrical activity in the brain can predict a person's choice seconds before they consciously make it. The signal appears before awareness, suggesting the conscious mind is more an observer than a driver. But if free will doesn't exist, what happens to morality, to responsibility? If our actions are predetermined, can anyone truly be blamed or praised for anything? To some thinkers, the answer is despair. To others, liberation. Because if there is no free will, then guilt, pride, and punishment lose their weight. You are not separate from the universe, you are the universe, acting out its laws. Yet not everyone accepts that freedom must vanish under determinism. Philosophers called compatibilists argue that free will and causality can coexist. Maybe freedom isn't about escaping cause and effect, but acting in accordance with your nature. To do what you want, even if what you want was shaped by forces beyond your control. The paradox deepens with quantum physics. At the smallest scales, the universe isn't deterministic, but probabilistic. Particles behave unpredictably, their outcomes uncertain. So does randomness restore freedom? Not really. A random action isn't free, it's just chaotic. Freedom requires meaning, not accident. Perhaps the resolution lies not in physics, but in perspective. Maybe free will is neither illusion nor absolute, but an emergent property, a story the universe tells through us. When you choose, you become the point where cause and effect meet, a pattern of matter briefly aware of its own motion through time. The free will paradox reminds us that freedom may not mean control, but consciousness, the awareness of being part of the grand unfolding and saying, "This
is me.
The simulation paradox. Imagine you're walking down a street. The air feels cool, the pavement solid beneath your feet. But how do you know it's real? What if the world around you, the sights, sounds, even your thoughts, are part of a vast, perfectly detailed simulation? This is the simulation paradox, a question that's moved from science fiction into serious scientific debate. The argument is simple and chilling. If it's possible to simulate consciousness, and advanced civilizations have the power to do so, then there would likely be far more simulated minds than real ones. If that's true, the odds that you are living in the original reality are vanishingly small. This idea, popularized by philosopher Nick Bostrom, rests on three possibilities. Either civilizations never reach the level to create conscious simulations, or they reach it but choose not to, or they do, and we are living in one right now. If reality is a simulation, then everything, physics, time, memory, is a set of rules running on some unimaginable processor. Every star, every person, every dream, a sequence of coded interactions. And yet, from inside the system, it feels perfectly real. But the paradox runs deeper, because even if you found proof that the universe is simulated, glitches in the code, edges in physics, mathematical patterns too neat to be natural, how could you be sure that your discovery wasn't part of the simulation? If the program can rewrite its own rules, then no experiment could ever escape it. Some scientists have even searched for signs that our universe might be quantized, its space and time divided into digital-like pixels at the smallest scales. So far, we've found nothing definitive. But the search continues. Others take the idea metaphorically. They say we already live in simulations, not digital ones, but perceptual. Our brains construct reality from limited sensory data, filtering and interpreting until we inhabit a version of the world unique to each of us. In that sense, we're all living in self-generated simulations, guided by memory, belief, and expectation. The simulation paradox leaves us with a choice. Either everything we experience is part of an unimaginable code, or we are the code itself, dreaming reality into being. Perhaps, in the end, there's no difference. If a simulated life feels real, if love and pain and meaning exist within it, then maybe reality is defined not by its source, but by our experience of it. If so, then we don't need to escape the simulation. We only need to wake up within it.
The eternal return paradox. Close your eyes and imagine this. The universe ends and then begins again. Everything that has ever happened happens once more, exactly the same way. Every heartbeat, every thought, every word you've ever spoken repeats endlessly, forever. This is the eternal return paradox, an idea that has haunted human thought for millennia. It asks, what if time is not a line, but a circle? The ancient Stoics believed the cosmos periodically burned and renewed itself, each cycle identical to the last, every event, every soul replaying infinitely. Later, the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche turned this concept into an existential test. He asked, if you knew you were destined to live this life again and again, down to its smallest detail, would you rejoice or despair? Science, too, flirts with the idea. Some cosmological models predict that the universe could expand, contract, and rebound forever, a big bounce rather than a big bang. Others suggest that infinite space and time mean every possible arrangement of atoms must eventually repeat. Somewhere, countless light years away, there might already be another you listening to these same words. The paradox of eternal return forces us to confront meaning itself. If everything repeats, then change is an illusion. But if change is an illusion, why strive? Why love, create, or hope? Nietzsche's answer was radical. He said we must live as if we would choose this life again eternally. The joy, courage, and acceptance come from embracing the cycle completely. In his eyes, eternity wasn't a prison, it was the ultimate affirmation of being. Perhaps that's the secret of the eternal return. It's not about the physics of time, but the philosophy of presence. If this moment will repeat forever, then it deserves your full attention, because eternity, in its endless loop,
might just be another word for now.
The Bolltzman Brain Paradox. Close your eyes and picture yourself floating in the darkness of space. There are no stars, no planets, no galaxies. Only the cold hum of the void stretching endlessly in every direction. And then, from that nothingness, a single mind appears, fully formed, complete with memories, sensations, and a lifetime of experiences that never actually happened. A brain born from randomness that believes it has lived a life like yours. This haunting image is the Bolltzman Brain Paradox, one of the strangest and most unsettling ideas in cosmology. It asks a simple but terrifying question. If the universe is vast enough, could consciousness spontaneously appear purely by chance? And if that's possible, how do you know you're not one of them? The paradox takes its name from Ludwig Bolltzman, a 19th century physicist who studied entropy, the tendency of the universe to drift from order to disorder over time. Bolltzman proposed that if the universe exists for long enough, then random fluctuations might occasionally reverse entropy, creating brief pockets of order. In an infinite cosmos, those fluctuations could take any form, even, theoretically, a self-aware mind emerging from chaos for a moment before dissolving again. Now, imagine how rare that would be, for molecules to randomly assemble into a conscious brain, complete with memories, thoughts, and identity. It seems impossible. But in an infinite timeline, impossible things don't just happen, they happen infinitely often. That's where the paradox begins. If the universe is eternal and boundless, then statistically, it's far more likely that a single isolated brain would pop into existence by chance than an entire structured universe like ours would form. The odds of creating you, your body, the Earth, and the galaxies beyond are astronomically small, but the odds of creating a mind that merely thinks it lives in that universe are far greater. So which is more likely? That you are part of a vast, consistent reality, or that you are a fleeting consciousness imagining one? It sounds absurd, even nightmarish, but scientists take it seriously because it challenges the logic of our cosmological models. If our theories predict a universe that would generate more random, disembodied minds than structured worlds like ours, then something about those theories must be wrong. The Bolltzman Brain Paradox forces physicists to reconsider the assumptions behind cosmic entropy, time, and the idea of infinity itself. Maybe the universe isn't eternal after all. Maybe it has a built-in end, a limit that prevents infinite chaos. Or maybe entropy doesn't behave the way we think it does. Maybe order can't spontaneously reassemble once it's lost. Still, beyond the math and physics, the paradox touches something profoundly human. Because in a way, we all live like Bolltzman brains already. Our entire experience of the world is filtered through the mind, a fragile structure of neurons trying to make sense of chaos. We don't perceive reality directly, we construct it. Every sight, sound, and memory is an electrical pattern, a model of the universe inside our heads. So what difference does it make whether that model is rooted in external reality or not? If you can think, feel, and love, if your life feels real, then perhaps that is reality. Perhaps existence isn't defined by what lies outside awareness, but by the awareness itself. The Bolltzman Brain Paradox asks us to consider that the universe might not exist for consciousness, but as consciousness. That what we call reality is the brief flicker of awareness trying to know itself before it fades back into the silence from which it came. It's a chilling thought, but also a strangely comforting one, because even if you were nothing more than a momentary spark of order in an infinite sea of chaos, you would still be here, for this one breath, this one heartbeat, this one reflection on existence. And maybe, in the grand scheme, that's all the universe ever needed, just a single mind to wonder why it exists at all. The reverse entropy paradox. Imagine a broken glass on the floor. Shards scatter in every direction, light glinting off their jagged edges. Now imagine that same moment, but in reverse. The pieces tremble, slide back together, and leap into your hand as if time itself has changed its mind. It feels impossible, doesn't it? Because it is. And yet, the laws of physics say it shouldn't be. This is the reverse entropy paradox, the contradiction between the reversible laws of physics and the irreversible arrow of time that we experience. At the fundamental level, the equations that govern our universe, Newton's motion, Einstein's relativity, the probabilities of quantum mechanics, all work equally well forward or backward. If you filmed two particles colliding and played it in reverse, the math would make just as much sense. Nothing in physics prefers future over past. And yet, everything in our experience does. Eggs crack, but don't uncrack. Ashes don't leap back into logs. We remember yesterday, but not tomorrow. The universe appears to have a direction, a current that flows from order into disorder, from creation into decay. That current is called entropy, a measure of how spread out or disordered energy becomes over time. The second law of thermodynamics tells us that in a closed system, entropy always increases. Heat flows from hot to cold, energy disperses, order breaks down, and once it does, it almost never returns. Entropy is what gives time its direction, what creates the sense of before and after. Without it, everything would look the same whether you played the film forward or backward. There would be no memory, no progress, no life. But here's the paradox. If the fundamental laws of physics are time-symmetric, then why does entropy always rise? Why did the universe begin in such an improbably low entropy state that everything since has been a slow unraveling? The question leads to one of the deepest mysteries in cosmology. At the moment of the Big Bang, the universe was unimaginably hot and dense, but also astonishingly ordered. Every particle arranged in near-perfect balance. From that improbable seed, the entire arrow of time was born. So why was the beginning so tidy? Why didn't the universe start in chaos? No one knows. Some physicists think the laws of the cosmos require a low entropy beginning. Others suspect it's a fluke, a statistical accident in an infinite multiverse. And some whisper that maybe we're asking the wrong question entirely. Maybe entropy isn't about disorder at all, but about information, about what can and can't be known. If you could reverse entropy, if you could truly run time backward, you wouldn't just see smoke return to a candle or waves unbreak on the shore. Your memories would vanish. Your heartbeat would unbeat. Your thoughts would unthink themselves. You wouldn't experience time in reverse. You'd cease to experience anything at all. Because consciousness, like the universe, depends on the one-way flow of order to chaos. That's the hidden beauty of entropy. It's not a force of destruction. It's the reason things happen at all. Stars shine because they burn their fuel and increase entropy. Life exists because it channels energy from ordered sunlight into disordered heat. Without decay, there would be no growth. Without endings, no beginnings. The reverse entropy paradox reminds us that what feels like loss, the falling apart of things, the fading of moments, is the same process that allows existence to unfold. The universe cannot build without breaking. It cannot live without dying. And somewhere in that endless drift toward disorder lies the meaning of time itself. Perhaps in another kind of universe, entropy might one day reverse, and every glass, every star, every life would reassemble itself perfectly in an eternal breath of renewal. But in ours, the flow is one way. And maybe that's what gives each moment its quiet power, the knowledge that it will never come again.
The present moment paradox.
Close your eyes and focus on this exact instant. The feeling of breath moving in and out of your lungs, the sound of these words reaching your ears, the simple awareness of being here. It feels like the most real thing in the universe. But as soon as you try to grasp it, the moment is gone. The present disappears the very instant you notice it. This is the present moment paradox, the mystery of how something so essential can also be impossible to hold. We talk about the present as if it's a point in time, a knife edge between the past and the future. But when you look closely, that edge has no thickness. You can never freeze the moment and say, "This is now," because by the time you do, it's already the past. Physicists and philosophers have wrestled with this for centuries. In our everyday experience, time seems to flow, one moment giving birth to the next. But in Einstein's theory of relativity, time doesn't flow at all. It's part of a four-dimensional fabric where every event, past, present, and future, already exists simultaneously. What we experience as now is just the point where our consciousness happens to be. In that view, the present is not a moving line, but a perspective, a window our minds open on an already complete universe. If you could step outside of time and see it all at once, there would be no before or after, only an eternal landscape where every moment still exists. But that picture, though elegant, feels distant from lived experience. Because to us, the present moves. We feel its flow in the beating of the heart, the rhythm of thought, the turning of days. The paradox lies in reconciling the timelessness of physics with the vivid immediacy of life. In philosophy, this tension is known as the problem of the specious present, the question of how we experience continuity in something that doesn't last. When you hear a melody, you don't hear one note at a time. You hear the shape of the tune. Your mind gathers fragments of past and future and blends them into a single, fluid now. The present, then, is not a point, but a window, a stretch of awareness wide enough to hold change within it. That's why moments can feel long or short, why time can slow in fear or vanish in joy. The present isn't measured by the clock, but by attention. It expands and contracts with the quality of your awareness. And yet the deeper we look, the more it dissolves. Try to isolate the exact boundary between past and future, and you'll find there isn't one. Every moment you live is already becoming memory. Every now is stitched to what came before and what will come next. Perhaps that's the secret, that the present is not a point at all, but a process, the meeting place of perception and change. It's the act of consciousness constantly stitching experience together faster than it can fall apart. In this sense, the present moment paradox isn't something to solve, but something to feel. Because while you can never hold the moment still, you can live inside it. You can surrender to its flow without needing to define it. Maybe the present isn't meant to be captured, only inhabited. And maybe that's why it feels so precious, because it never repeats. The past is memory, the future is imagination, but the present, fleeting, fragile, forever vanishing, is the only place where life actually happens. So breathe. Notice the sound of this sentence. In this instant, before it fades, you are touching eternity, one heartbeat at a time.
The Omnipotence Paradox of creation. Imagine an all-powerful being, limitless, eternal, and absolute. A being who can create anything, move anything, and command everything. Now imagine asking a single question that even such a being cannot answer. Can an all-powerful creator make something so heavy that even they cannot lift it?
If the answer is yes, then there exists something they cannot do. Lift it. If the answer is no, then there exists something they cannot create it. Either way, omnipotence seems to cancel itself out. This is the Omnipotence Paradox of creation, a riddle that exposes the limits of what limitless can mean. It's not a question about weight or strength, it's about logic itself. Can absolute power include the power to break the rules that make it possible? The paradox traces back to ancient theology and philosophy. Medieval thinkers like Thomas Aquinas and Maimonides wrestled with it in their attempts to define divine perfection. If God is truly all-powerful, does that mean God can do the logically impossible? Make a square circle, or a rock too heavy to lift? Or does true omnipotence mean being bound by reason, able to do all things that can be done, but not things that contradict themselves? Aquinas proposed that logical contradictions aren't things at all. They're linguistic illusions, nonsense disguised as questions. An all-powerful being isn't limited by logic because logic defines the framework of what being even means. To ask if an infinite creator can make itself powerless is to ask if existence can cease to exist. The question dissolves as soon as you try to hold it. And yet, the paradox persists because it forces us to confront the nature of creation itself. If an omnipotent being made the universe, did it limit itself by doing so? Did it set boundaries, laws, physics, time, that even it must now obey? Or does it exist outside those laws, forever watching the system it spun into motion? Some philosophers argue that creation itself is the act of self-limitation. To create something independent, the creator must withdraw, allowing space for what is not itself. A painter steps back from the canvas. A writer lets the story unfold. Perhaps an all-powerful being must limit its own power to let a universe like ours exist at all. In this sense, the Omnipotence Paradox becomes a story about freedom. If the creator could intervene at every moment, then nothing would have meaning. Choice, growth, and discovery require a world that is not constantly rewritten. Power, to be complete, must include the power not to act. In physics, there's a curious echo of this idea. The universe follows laws, mathematical, elegant, unbreakable. Even chaos obeys structure. If those laws are the rules written at the beginning, then perhaps creation was not an act of domination, but of letting go, a conscious decision to let existence unfold according to its own patterns. That makes omnipotence something different from what we imagine. Not a hand that controls everything, but a hand that releases it. Not a will that commands, but one that allows. And perhaps that's the deeper meaning of the paradox. It's not a flaw in logic, but reflection of the tension between perfection and possibility. To be truly infinite, power must contain its own opposite, the ability to limit itself, the strength to create something free. So can an all-powerful being make a stone so heavy it cannot lift it? Maybe the answer is yes. And that stone is the universe itself. A creation so vast, so self-contained, that even the one who made it can only watch it rise and fall moment by moment as it discovers its own way of being.
The Temporal Loop Paradox. Imagine waking up one morning and realizing that today is the same as yesterday. Not metaphorically, but literally. The same sunlight spills through the window. The same song plays on the radio. The same people speak the same words in the same order. And you remember it all. You try to change something, but every choice you make only leads you back to the exact moment you began. This is the Temporal Loop Paradox, a riddle at the intersection of time, memory, and causality. It asks, if events repeat endlessly,
Is anything ever new? And if you break the loop, what happens to the versions of yourself that came before? We see loops everywhere in fiction. In stories of travelers trapped in repeating days, scientists reliving experiments, or universes caught in cycles of birth and death. But the paradox isn't just a narrative device. It's rooted in the physics of time itself. Einstein's theory of general relativity allows for something called a closed time-like curve, a path through space-time that folds back on itself. In such a universe, you could, in principle, travel into your own past and arrive at the very moment you left. The loop would be perfect, a circle of cause and effect with no clear beginning or end. But that's where the trouble begins. If you can return to the past, then everything you do there must already have happened. You can't truly change it because your actions are already part of the history you came from. Every attempt to alter the loop only ensures its continuation. You might escape, but in doing so, you've already fulfilled your role in keeping it closed. This is the heart of the paradox. When time curves back on itself, freedom becomes illusion. The future causes the past, and the past shapes the future. Each depends on the other in an endless symmetry that leaves no room for change. The physicist Kurt Gödel once showed that certain solutions to Einstein's equations would allow universes like this to exist, cosmic whirlpools of time where every event eventually returns to itself. In such a universe, there would be no universal now, no clear direction of time. Everything would simply be, forever looping, forever self-consistent. But what would it feel like to live inside such a loop? Would you know it was happening? Would you be aware that your life was repeating? Or would each cycle feel new, erasing the memory of the last? And if you did remember, if you carried the knowledge of every repetition, how long before the meaning of choice began to fade? Some philosophers suggest that the temporal loop isn't a bug in reality, but a mirror for human experience. After all, we already live in loops. Days repeat, seasons return, history recycles its patterns. We relive old mistakes, revisit familiar feelings, repeat words we swore we'd never say again. Our minds crave closure, yet our lives unfold in circles. Maybe the loop isn't meant to be broken. Maybe it's meant to be understood. Because within repetition lies recognition, the chance to see things differently, even if the events themselves never change. A loop can be a trap, but it can also be a lesson. The temporal loop paradox reminds us that time may not be a straight line after all. It might be a spiral, repeating, but always shifting, each cycle bringing us back to the same moment from a slightly higher view. And if the universe truly is caught in a loop, then perhaps its purpose isn't to escape, but to awaken, to realize that even in endless repetition, awareness transforms everything. Because the moment you truly see the loop, you've already stepped outside it.
The forgetting paradox. Memory is what binds us to ourselves, the thread that weaves our past into our present. We think of forgetting as failure, as something lost, something broken. But what if forgetting isn't the opposite of remembering? What if it's what allows life to move forward at all? This is the forgetting paradox, the mystery of how losing parts of who we were is the very thing that lets us become someone new. At first, it seems tragic. You forget names, places, moments that once shaped you. The faces of childhood friends fade. The sound of a voice softens. The details of once vibrant days dissolve. It feels like erosion, a slow undoing of identity. But without that erosion, we would never grow. A mind that remembered everything would be crushed beneath the weight of its own past. Neuroscience offers a simple truth. The brain is designed to forget. Every day, it prunes connections, deleting unused memories to make room for the new. Forgetting is not decay, it's maintenance. Without it, we'd be overwhelmed, paralyzed by details that never fade.
The very act of learning depends on the ability to let go. But the paradox runs deeper than biology, because in forgetting, we lose not only information, but pieces of the people we once were. The child you were is gone, not because they died, but because you forgot enough of their world to move on. Every stage of life is built on the partial amnesia of the last. Philosophers have long recognized this. The ancient Greeks saw memory and forgetting as two sides of the same coin. The goddess Mnemosyne, memory, was mother to the Muses, but her twin was Lethe, the river of forgetting, whose waters washed away the past. To drink from Lethe was to be reborn, cleansed of what came before. It wasn't punishment, it was mercy. Because without forgetting, forgiveness would be impossible. Pain would never fade and wounds would never close. Love itself depends on the ability to forget just enough, to soften edges, to let the present outshine the past. Even grief requires forgetting, slowly untangling us from the weight of loss until we can breathe again. Yet forgetting also brings its own unease. If memory gives us identity, then every act of forgetting is a small act of erasure. We vanish piece by piece, our stories rewritten in silence. Who are you when the past begins to fade? If everything you remember can change or disappear, what anchors the self? Perhaps nothing does. Perhaps that's what makes life possible. Because to hold on to everything would be to stop time, to live in a museum of what once was, never stepping into what could be. Forgetting is the universe's quiet way of reminding us that impermanence is necessary. It's what turns the river of life from a stagnant pool into a flowing current. The forgetting paradox asks us to see loss differently. To forget isn't to fail, but to make space, to clear the cluttered mind so that awareness can see again. In forgetting, we are not diminished, we are renewed. Maybe that's what rebirth truly means. Not an end followed by a new beginning, but a continuous process of remembering and releasing, holding and letting go. You are not the sum of what you remember. You are the rhythm between memory and forgetting, between what endures and what fades. And maybe in the end, the act of forgetting isn't the loss of the past, but the gift of the present. A gentle unburdening that allows each new version of you to step forward into the light, unshackled by everything that came before.
The Fate versus Chaos Paradox. Stand beneath a storm and watch the lightning fall. It seems wild, random, a burst of pure chaos across the sky. But beneath that chaos lies pattern. Air currents, pressure gradients, temperature differences, the laws of physics unfolding exactly as they must. From disorder emerges design. From chance, inevitability. This is the Fate versus Chaos Paradox, the tension between randomness and order, between a universe that seems unpredictable and one that follows laws too precise to break. For thousands of years, humans have swung between these two poles. Some saw life as scripted, every event written by gods or destiny. Others saw it as meaningless motion, a dice roll in an indifferent cosmos. But modern science reveals something stranger. Fate and chaos may not be opposites at all. They may be two faces of the same truth. In the 20th century, physicists discovered chaos theory, the study of systems so sensitive to initial conditions that the smallest change can alter everything that follows. The classic example is the butterfly effect. A butterfly flaps its wings in Brazil, and weeks later, a tornado forms in Texas. Every gust of wind, every particle of air obeys the deterministic laws of motion, yet the outcome is effectively unpredictable. It's not that the system is lawless, it's that the laws create complexity beyond comprehension. Mathematician Edward Lorenz, who discovered this phenomenon, was astonished by what his equations revealed. He realized that even in perfectly deterministic systems, those governed by strict cause and effect, outcomes can still appear random. Prediction becomes impossible,
not because the universe lacks order, but because the order is deeper than we can measure. That's the heart of the paradox. If everything follows physical law, then fate is real. But if those laws generate complexities so vast that no being could ever foresee the results, then chaos reigns. Both are true. The universe is fated and unpredictable at once. Quantum mechanics adds another layer to the mystery. At the smallest scales, the world isn't just unpredictable, it's probabilistic. Particles don't have fixed positions or velocities until they're measured. They exist as waves of possibility. When observed, they collapse into definite states. Einstein resisted this idea, famously saying, "God does not play dice." But experiments have shown that, in a sense, he was wrong, or at least incomplete. At the quantum level, nature does play dice. The roll of those dice, however, still obeys precise mathematical probabilities. So, where does that leave us? Between fate and chance? Between cause and chaos? Maybe the answer lies not in the universe, but in how we perceive it. To an observer within time, life feels uncertain. We can't see the equations, the countless threads of interaction stretching backward and forward. We stand inside the storm, seeing only the lightning. But from the outside, from the view of physics, every flash, every gust, was always going to happen that way. Some scientists see this as evidence that the universe is fundamentally deterministic, an immense computation unfolding from the conditions set at the beginning of time. Others suggest that true randomness exists and that free will arises from it, a conscious echo of the chaos written into quantum space. Perhaps both are right, because even if the future is written in the fabric of physics, it's written in a language too vast for any mind to read. For us, that ignorance is freedom. The illusion of choice, felt within a deterministic world, may be indistinguishable from real choice. The fate versus chaos paradox reminds us that life's unpredictability isn't proof of disorder, it's the visible expression of complexity so deep that it can never repeat exactly. Every pattern is both rule and accident. Every coincidence, both chance and design. Maybe fate doesn't mean everything is fixed, and chaos doesn't mean everything is random. Maybe together they form the rhythm of existence. Order born from uncertainty, certainty dissolving back into chance. Because in the end, the storm doesn't choose where to strike, and yet it never strikes by mistake.
The Arrow and the Tortoise Paradox. Picture an arrow flying through the air. At every instant, it occupies a single position in space, a still frame frozen in time. If it's motionless at every instant, how can it ever move? Now imagine Achilles, the greatest runner in Greece, chasing a tortoise that's been given a small head start. He runs faster, infinitely faster, but by the time he reaches the tortoise's last position, it's moved a little further ahead. He closes the gap again and again, yet the distance never truly disappears. How can something that moves faster never overtake something slower? These are the Arrow and the Tortoise paradoxes, both devised by the ancient philosopher Zeno of Elea around 2,500 years ago. He used them to challenge one of our most basic assumptions, that motion is continuous and time is divisible. In the Arrow paradox, Zeno argued that motion is impossible because at every single instant the arrow is at rest. It has no speed, no movement, just position. If every moment of time contains a motionless arrow, then motion itself seems to be nothing more than an illusion strung together from stillness. In the Tortoise Paradox, or Achilles and the Tortoise, the problem is infinite division. To reach the tortoise, Achilles must first cover half the distance, then half of what remains, and then half again. No matter how many times he runs, there's always another halfway point, an infinite number of steps, each smaller than the last. An infinity, Zeno claimed, can never be completed. For centuries, these paradoxes baffled thinkers. They seemed absurd, yet no one could fully disprove them. It wasn't until the 17th century, with the invention of calculus by Isaac Newton and Gottfried Leibniz, that mathematics finally offered a solution. An infinite series of ever smaller numbers can indeed have a finite sum. Achilles can reach the tortoise because even though there are infinite steps, the total distance and time converge to a limit. Still, the paradox lingers beneath the surface. Calculus explains how motion works numerically, but not what motion actually is. Is time continuous, a smooth river that flows endlessly? Or is it made of discrete frames, tiny moments stacked like the pages of a flipbook? If the universe is truly continuous, then motion is seamless. But if reality is granular, if time comes in indivisible quanta, as some physicists now suspect, then perhaps Zeno was closer to the truth than we think. Quantum mechanics suggests that the universe might have the smallest possible unit of time, the Planck time, about 10 to the minus 43 seconds. Below that, before and after lose meaning. The world no longer behaves smoothly, but in flickering intervals, as if reality updates itself frame by frame. If so, motion could be the illusion of continuity created by discrete changes, a cosmic film played fast enough that we never notice the gaps. In Einstein's relativity, motion is not absolute, but relational. An arrow moves only relative to what surrounds it. To someone traveling alongside it, it would appear perfectly still. In that sense, Zeno's arrow is motionless. It's the fabric of space-time itself that creates the illusion of movement. But maybe Zeno's paradoxes weren't meant to disprove motion, but to humble the mind. They remind us that our senses and logic struggle to comprehend infinity, that even something as familiar as movement is built upon concepts our brains can't truly picture, infinitesimals, limits, the continuum of time. The arrow on the tortoise paradox reveals how strange it is that motion works at all, that an infinite number of instants can produce the flow of life, and an infinite sequence of steps can still lead to arrival. It's a paradox that hides inside every heartbeat, every falling leaf, every passing second. And perhaps the beauty of Zeno's riddle is that it doesn't stop motion, it makes us see it differently. Every step, no matter how small, is infinite in its own way. Every movement is built from 1,000 impossibilities that somehow add up to something that feels continuous, alive, and real. The arrow still flies, Achilles still runs, and time, whatever it truly is, still moves us forward, moment by impossible moment.
The end of time paradox. Imagine standing at the very edge of existence, where galaxies have faded, stars have burned out, and the universe itself has grown cold and silent. There is no sunrise, no motion, no sound. Every particle drifts in endless stillness. It is not space that has ended, but something deeper, time itself. This is the end of time paradox, a riddle that asks not when the universe will end, but whether endings can exist at all if time, the measure of before and after, ceases to flow. To imagine time ending is to confront a contradiction. The very act of thinking about after assumes that time continues. But what would it mean for time to truly stop? Could the universe still exist without it? According to modern cosmology, time is not separate from space. It's part of the same four-dimensional fabric, space-time. Einstein's theory of relativity revealed that time bends, stretches, and slows in response to gravity and speed. The stronger the gravity, the slower time runs. Near a black hole, for instance, time can dilate so severely that to an outside observer, it almost halts. If you were to watch someone fall toward a black hole's event horizon, you would never see them cross it. They would appear frozen, forever suspended at the edge. So perhaps the end of time is not a future event,
but a condition, a boundary beyond which time as we know it has no meaning. Physicists describe several possible fates for the universe. In one scenario, the heat death, the cosmos expands forever. Stars burn out, galaxies drift apart, and entropy reaches its maximum. When there is no energy left to do work, no change, no difference, time itself becomes meaningless. Without motion or contrast, there can be no before or after. In another vision, the Big Crunch, gravity eventually reverses expansion, pulling everything back together. As space collapses into a single point, time could loop back on itself, ending not in stillness, but in repetition, a universe reborn from its own demise. And then there's the Big Rip, a more violent fate proposed by modern physics. If dark energy continues to accelerate cosmic expansion, it will one day tear apart galaxies, stars, atoms, even space-time itself. When that happens, the very structure that carries time would unravel. Clocks would stop not because they broke, but because there would be nothing left for them to measure. Yet, for all its scale, the paradox isn't confined to the cosmos. It lives inside consciousness too. When we sleep, meditate, or fall in love, our perception of time stretches and contracts. Moments can feel eternal or vanish in an instant. In death, many report the sensation that time dissolves entirely, a feeling of infinite stillness. Could the end of time, then, be less of a physical event and more of a shift in awareness? Theoretical physicist Julian Barber argues that time might not exist at all. In his view, the universe is composed of countless nows, individual configurations of matter that exist timelessly. The flow of time, he says, is the illusion created by memory. What we call the passage of time is simply the mind comparing one static state to another. If that's true, then time never truly ends, because it never truly began. The end of time paradox reminds us that beginnings and endings are human constructs. The universe might not be moving from A to B, it might simply be. An eternal landscape where every moment, from the birth of stars to their final flicker, coexists in stillness. Perhaps the end of time is not a catastrophe to fear, but a truth already surrounding us. The quiet, timeless reality beneath the illusion of change. And maybe when everything else fades, what remains is not darkness or silence, but the eternal presence of now.
The Sleeping Beauty Paradox. Imagine this. A scientist tells you they're going to put you to sleep for an experiment. While you're asleep, a fair coin will be flipped. If it lands on heads, you'll be woken up once, on Monday, and then the experiment will end. If it lands on tails, you'll be woken up on Monday and again on Tuesday, but your memory will be erased between awakenings. So when you open your eyes and wake in a room, you'll have no idea what day it is and no memory of ever waking before. Now here's the question. When you open your eyes, what is the probability that the coin landed on heads? Logic says the answer should be 50%. After all, the coin is fair. But another argument says it's 1 in 3, because there are 3 possible experiences of waking: Monday heads, Monday tails, and Tuesday tails. Only one of those corresponds to heads. This is the Sleeping Beauty Paradox, a question that seems to split reason itself in two. It's not just about probability, it's about what it means to be an observer in a world that contains uncertainty, duplication, and the strange geometry of time. At first, the problem feels mathematical, but beneath it lies a deeper tension between knowledge and existence, between what's true and what's experienced. When Sleeping Beauty wakes up, she knows the rules of the experiment. She knows the coin is fair. But she also knows something new, that she's awake. That simple fact changes the odds. If the coin landed on tails, there are 2 possible awakenings. If it landed on heads, only 1. So purely by counting possible experiences, it's twice as likely that she's living in a tails world. From her perspective, the probability of heads has fallen to 1/3. This view, called the thirder position, argues that self-location, the knowledge of being you, now, here, can change probabilities. It suggests that observation isn't just about knowing outcomes, but knowing which copy of yourself is observing them. It's an unsettling thought, because it means that reality isn't just about what happens, but who experiences it. The opposing view, the halfer position, insists that nothing has changed. The coin was 50-50 before she slept, and it remains 50-50 after she wakes. Her ignorance of what day it is doesn't alter the underlying odds. In this interpretation, the extra awakenings don't matter. They're repetitions of the same event. There is only one truth, the coin flip itself. So who's right? Mathematicians and philosophers have debated it for decades. No consensus has emerged. Each side seems airtight, yet they cannot both be true. But what makes the Sleeping Beauty paradox so enduring isn't just the math, it's what it reveals about consciousness and identity. When you wake, you don't just find yourself in a world, you find yourself as a world. A single point of awareness, anchored in one version of events. In a universe that may contain countless possible experiences, you can only live one of them. And that raises a quiet, unnerving question. If there are infinite ways reality could unfold, what does it mean to be this one? In cosmology and quantum physics, similar logic appears in the anthropic principle. The idea that the universe's laws must allow for observers, because if they didn't, we wouldn't be here to notice. We don't just live in a universe. We live in this universe because it's the one that gives rise to beings who can ask why. The Sleeping Beauty paradox reminds us that knowledge is not absolute. It depends on perspective, memory, and existence itself. Perhaps the universe, like the experiment, contains many awakenings, many versions of the same question, each unaware of the others. And in every one of them, we wake up, confused, curious, and trying to understand what kind of coin flip brought us here. Because in the end, whether the answer is 1/2 or 1/3 may not matter as much as the deeper truth beneath it, that awareness itself is the greatest mystery of all. The moment you open your eyes, you are already part of the paradox. A consciousness trying to reason its way out of a dream.
The paradox of the universe itself. Look around you. Every object, every atom, every breath of air, all part of a single, vast system. A universe that somehow exists, suspended between the infinite and the infinitesimal. It contains everything: space, time, energy, matter, consciousness. And yet, within all that everything, the most profound mystery remains. Why is there anything at all? This is the paradox of the universe itself, the ultimate question that lies beneath every other question. If the universe contains all things, then what contains the universe? If existence began with the Big Bang, what existed before it? And how could before even exist when time itself began at that moment? Science can describe the universe in exquisite detail. The equations of general relativity explain how space and time bend around mass and energy. Quantum mechanics describes the subatomic world with eerie precision. Cosmology traces the evolution of the cosmos from a point of unimaginable density and heat to the billions of galaxies we see today. And yet, every law, every theory leads back to the same silent question. Why these laws and not others? Why does something obeying mathematics exist at all?
Physicist Stephen Hawking once asked, "What breathes fire into the equations and makes a universe for them to describe?" Because numbers and rules alone are empty. There must be something that makes them real. But if the universe includes everything, then there can be nothing outside of it to give it that spark. It must somehow create itself. And that idea leads straight into paradox. How can something come from nothing when nothing, by definition, cannot produce anything? Maybe the problem lies in how we think about nothingness. Quantum field theory suggests that the vacuum of space isn't truly empty, it seethes with energy, particles flickering in and out of existence. From this restless foam, entire universes could, in theory, bubble into being. But then we're left with a new question. Where did the quantum field come from? What gave rise to the fabric that allows existence to emerge at all? Some cosmologists propose that our universe is just one of countless others, a multiverse of infinite variations, each with its own laws and constants. If everything that can exist does exist somewhere, then maybe our universe is simply one branch in an eternal cosmic tree. But even that doesn't escape the paradox, because an infinite multiverse still needs an explanation for why it exists at all. Infinity doesn't erase the question, it multiplies it. Relativity tells us that time itself is part of the universe, so the universe can't have a before. But perhaps it has no need for one. Physicist Stephen Hawking once described a model where the universe is finite but unbounded, like the surface of a sphere with no edge and no beginning. In that sense, the universe doesn't start or end, it simply is, a self-contained existence without cause or creator. That idea echoes the oldest philosophies. In Hindu cosmology, the universe is eternal, a cycle of creation and dissolution. In Taoism, existence arises spontaneously from the Tao, the unnameable source that contains all opposites. Even in modern physics, some suspect that reality is self-consistent, a feedback loop where the laws of nature are the reason for their own existence. It's dizzying to think about, a cosmos that explains itself by existing, a reality with no outside, no before, no cause, just an infinite unfolding of being that asks the question and answers it in the same breath. Because in the end, the greatest paradox of all is that the universe shouldn't exist, and yet, somehow, it does.